And good evening. We are live right here on YouTube. I'm Jonathan Higgins, the host of the Scanner Guys. Well, there has been record-breaking numbers for traveling by car this year on Memorial Day weekend. So I figured I would talk about scanning from A to B. We're talking about GPS scanning with your Uniden Scanners. So if this is something that you've thought about doing in the past, this show is going to kind of tell you all about how it works, and hopefully you'll be able to give it a try at some point. You're going to need a couple of components, which we'll talk about during this show tonight. So let's take a look at tonight's program and go over a little bit about programming. So the roadmap to programming, I've featured this in a couple of different shows in the past. I always recommend doing some research in radio reference. That's the nationwide database for scanning. So, if you're looking to figure out, on your road trip what you want to monitor, whether it's in the clear or if they're using some sort of encryption, you want to do your research in radio reference. Typically, when traveling, you probably will be traveling through a whole bunch of states. You may only want to monitor the highway patrol, the public works that maintain the highways. Look up what type of system they're on. Are they on a trunking system? Are they on a conventional system? The other thing, too, is having the right scanner for the job. You may have more than one scanner, and you may not have a scanner in the vehicle at this moment. Maybe you're going to use a portable radio that you have and maybe connect up the GPS component to that and see if that is the right scanner for the job for the trip that you're taking. That's definitely a key thing. The other thing, too, that you may want to do, and you need to do this every so often, is check the firmware. Check for updates. That's a big thing to be able to do. Check the firmware. This firmware is basically the software that keeps the scanner up to date. You know how many of you have smartphones, and there is security updates to keep it running properly and secure. For scanners, it's basically little software updates, to eliminate certain issues or add additional features to the radio. If you're using a database scanner, don't forget to update that database. So if you're using a Home Patrol type of scanner, like the Home Patrol 1 or 2 or the 436, 536, STS 100 or 200, or if you're on the Whistler side of things, although GPS scanning doesn't apply over there, that TX1, TX2, or any of the other models that are database driven. You want to make sure that you not only check that firmware, but update the database. The next thing on the list here is basically planning out your programming. You want to make sure that you kind of have a plan in place. So let's say if I was traveling from here in Cincinnati, Ohio to Boston, I probably want to program in the highway patrol through the state of Ohio. Once I get to Pennsylvania, I can't monitor the Pennsylvania State Police, but I can monitor the DPW out there, so I can listen to that. And then once I travel through there, maybe figure out what I want to monitor through New York. And then as I make my way to Boston, depending on what route, maybe if I'm going through Connecticut, I want to monitor the Connecticut State Police and then the Rhode Island State Police, making my way up to I-95 there. And then once I get into Massachusetts, maybe monitor the Mass State Police. And if I was staying in Boston, of course, program in the city of Boston while I'm there for that particular trip. So that's kind of what I mean by programming it out, figuring out what you're going to monitor, what you want to program into the radio. The next step, number 5, is basically creating that programming profile by using scanner software. Now, a database scanner on the Uniden side, of course, there is the Sentinel software. And if you're using a clean slate scanner like the 996P2 or the 325P2, those radios, you can basically use the Butel software with those. You can also use the Butel software with some of the database scanners as well. But you want to use the Sentinel software for updating that firmware and database inside. But if you're creating favorites lists, on those radios. You can, of course, use the equivalent Butel software for that. The last step is checking the programming on the scanner, make sure it's ready to go. Kind of review it, make sure everything looks good. Make sure that you maybe create an additional SD card if you're doing a database scanner, so in case something goes wrong with the SD card, you can switch over. If you are bringing your laptop with you, if you want to tweak the programming, make sure you've packed everything needed with your laptop. Plus, don't forget that programming cable as well. And then if you're using a portable radio and you plan to use it as a portable once you reach your destination, make sure your batteries are charged up or you've got plenty of alkaline batteries if you're going to go that route. So that's our roadmap to scanner programming. So starting at radio reference, working our way all the way through, finding the right scanner for the job, updating your firmware, planning out your programming, and then programming your radio, and then double checking and making sure everything is ready to go. So with the Uniden radios, there is a GPS kit. So you can see there in the middle, looks like a little phone jack on there. That's the dongle. And then there's the hub that's right to the left of that. And then all around it is the various cables depending on the model radio that you have. Now the GPS kit comes with a manual. It'll tell you what connectors and such you need. We've done a show in the past on the channel as well, so you can look at that show where I've kind of broken down, okay, so if you got the Home Patrol 2, you're going to need this, this, and this. If you got the SDS 200, you'll need this, and so forth. Currently, the radio that are on the list, the 15X, the 325, the 996, 436, 536, Home Patrol 1 and 2, and then, of course, the SDS 100 and 200 work with this kit. And some of the older models do too. You want to be able to check your baud rate, make sure that is right. Now, how does it all work? So your scanner is connected up to this kit, and then it's receiving from a satellite latitude and longitude. That's all it's receiving, lat and long. So the scanner knows where it's at, latitude, longitude, and then what happens is the programming, when you program it for GPS scanning on whatever radio that you have on the Uniden side of things that supports it, it sees that latitude and longitude and then looks at the programming and sees what the latitude and longitude of the things that you have programmed in. By looking at that, it determines, okay, I need to turn these things on. Also, the other thing it looks at excuse me, is the radiuses that you've programmed in there as well. Let's talk about that in a little bit more detail here. So before we get into radiuses, let's take a look at a road map. So this is, of course, towns in Ohio, cities or towns, I should say. And, you've got Troy, Dayton, Middletown, Hamilton, Fairfield, and then right on into Cincinnati. So let's say we're traveling from Troy to Cincinnati. So what'll happen, because we have our scanner programmed with GPS scanning, it will turn things on and off as we make our way to our destination. Now, with radio reference, some of this, what we call geotagging, is listed in the background in the software. So literally, what that does is when you import in the programming into a favorites list, it'll grab, Troy, and then it'll grab the latitude and longitude for that city and then have a radius in the background. So typically the radius, if it's done correctly in radio reference, is going to be the circumference of Troy. And then the same thing for Dayton, center point in Dayton, and then a latitude and longitude radius around that as well. So let's take a look at this on the next slide. It looks like the Olympics here. Granted, it's not perfect like this, with all the cities and towns like this, but you get the general sense. So Troy has got a center point right in the middle and then a radius of X amount of miles. So what happens is once you enter into that area, your scanner then turns this on. So you're now monitoring Troy. Once you start to leave that area, that will turn off, and then in this case, Dayton would turn on. As you make your way further, you'll have some cases where you're still monitoring Dayton, and you're also starting to monitor Middletown because there's overlap in the circles. So all of this is in the background of radio reference. You can tweak it using the scanner software, especially on the Butel software. You're able to tweak this information. So if you want a larger or smaller radius around a city or town, you could change that as well. You can really customize it. I remember back in the day when I was living in Massachusetts, there was the Emerald Square Mall in North Attleboro. So I programmed that into the scanner. And of course, their repeater system at the mall probably had about a mile or so radius for reception. So what I would do is I programmed in the security and maintenance as its own group in the scanner, and then did a latitude and longitude center point at the Emerald Square Mall, and then a radius of maybe 1 or 2 miles. So that allowed me, once I was in that area, to be able to monitor if there was anything that was going on. As soon as I left that area, that would turn off. So even to a scale of that, you can actually do GPS scanning. Since I live here in Ohio, I have a 536 in my truck, and I use GPS scanning. So if I'm traveling down into downtown Cincinnati, it will turn things on and off through there. I actually have it broken out. So East District for police will turn on its own and then turn off as I go into another area. So let's take a look at the truck going a little further down the road here. Of course, it looks like up and down with hills here. But where my truck is right now, it shows that I'm monitoring in the scanner. I'm monitoring Middletown, and I'm also monitoring Hamilton because it's within that pink circle and that blue circle. As it's traveling, it'll turn things on and off. And a lot of times these circles are not exactly like this. You may have some areas where these circles overlap a lot. So let's say if, that Fairfield circle is more closer to Middletown, you'd be monitoring Middletown, Fairfield, and Hamilton at the same time. And then you would eventually start moving down the road a little further away, and then that will turn off Middletown. So once again, let me review. So radio reference in the background has latitude and longitude for each city and town, or how they're grouped in the database. Then the next thing is they've put in a radius. So let's say Troy has a 20-mile radius. Middletown's got a 10-mile radius. Dayton has got a 11-mile radius. So when you enter in these areas, it'll turn on and off. So essentially the scanner, all it's receiving from the satellite is latitude, longitude. And then with that data, the scanner is then determining from the programming what needs to be turned on or off as you travel. Oops, I go the wrong direction. There we go. So, full database scanner versus favorites list scanning. This is a question I get all the time. So, of course, you can do GPS scanning with a full database. But there's a lot of stuff in the database, and you may find that you have too many things to scan. It's way too much. You're just overwhelmed. It just becomes noise at this point. And of course, when there's way too many things to scan, slower scanner speeds. It's going to take a while to get all the way back around the horn again. So what I recommend for GPS scanning on a database scanner is a favorites list. You're picking what you want to scan, which allows you to go into that database, which is in the Sentinel software, is the radio reference database for the United States and Canada. And you're going in there and you're deciding, okay, on my road trip, I want to monitor the highway patrol or the state police because I'm going to be driving on the highway a lot. but I'm going to be driving through Columbus, Ohio. So I want to put in that city in there so I can have some interesting listening while I travel through Columbus. Maybe I'm going to travel all the way up to Cleveland. So, that'll turn on. And then as I travel further out west, or east, I should say, maybe it'll be just the highway patrol. So you're really choosing what you want to monitor, picking from that favorites list. The great thing about it is you're not missing communication on your route. In some cases, when I was traveling to work, when I lived out in Massachusetts and I worked at Scanner Master, I lived in Attleboro, Massachusetts, and I drove up to up 495 to Scanner Master. I had all the cities and towns along 495 along my route in a favorites list. So as I traveled up 495, I just heard those cities and towns. And the great thing about that is if there was a motor vehicle accident on 495, I would hear that local fire department responding to a motor vehicle accident. Because typically it would be the fire department responding to the motor vehicle accident. I was also monitoring the Mass State Police. So I wasn't hearing towns that were, outside of the highway. They could be slightly touching the highway, but they don't patrol the highway. So that's a great thing about doing that is you're not picking up, maybe a town that's slightly, you're on the edge of that circle, being able to hear it. Let's take a look at the next slide here. So home patrol type of scanners. So you want to keep these things in mind. Once you reach your destination, you want to, probably create a favorites list because you're going to be able to monitor, just those things that you want. So let's say you do arrive and, traffic was miserable. Let's say we're in Ohio. We travel from Cincinnati over to Columbus, and we get up to Cleveland. And it's been a long drive. I'm going to stay overnight in Cleveland. So I'm going to use the full database because I didn't create a favorites list for this area. So the things that you want to keep in mind with the home patrol type of scanners, when you're at the hotel, you want to reduce down what's being scanned. Now, when you enter in that zip code, you want to reduce down the range down to 0. You don't need a big circle around that zip code. It's going to pull in a lot of stuff. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is you want to turn off certain service types. Maybe you don't want to monitor aviation or railroads, or maybe you're just interested in the police, so you're going to turn off all the fire tagged ones. So that's another thing that increases the scanning speed when you're running the full database. Also, national systems. There's a lot of national systems or generic, scan lists that are in there. You want to probably turn those off as well. And then, of course, when you're in the vehicle, of course, use your GPS when traveling. Favorites list. When you're doing a favorites list, so let's say I have a planned stop in Cleveland. So I want to do my research on radio reference. I want to see if there's anything interesting to monitor on the railroads or aviation. Of course, those are not default on the scanner to be turned on when you buy it out of the box. So make sure you turn on those service types if you're interested in air or railroads. So if you bought the scanner brand new and you're like, I programmed in a favorites list, Amtrak, CSX, Norfolk Southern, but I'm not hearing anything. So by default on these radios, the home patrol style radios, that service type, the railroads, aviation, maritime, several others are turned off by default. So if you're into one of these specialty scans, such as the railroads, you want to make sure you turn on that service type. Program what you need, and remember to pick out what channels and talk groups you want to scan. Now, keep in mind, if you're putting everything underneath the kitchen sink and then some, you're not going to be able to follow a lot, especially if you're scanning hundreds of channels or talk groups. So you want to reduce it down to a reasonable level. You want to be able to kind of follow along. Unless you don't care, then you can program in everything underneath the kitchen sink. The other cool thing about these radios is you can create multiple favorites lists. You can have a whole bunch of favorites lists. And the way my scanner is I have it so if I'm in a city, I have a favorites list for inside that particular city. I also have favorites lists that I enable GPS, and I also make that a part of the name. So, like let's say if I have a big file that has all the state police or highway patrols for all of the northeastern part of the country, and I have the GPS enabled on it, maybe I'll put highway patrol northeast or NE GPS. I would just name it that, so I know that favorites list, I have it enabled so for GPS scanning. So if I'm doing a road trip, I'm going to turn that one on, have my GPS connected up to it, enabled, and then do that. So it's really a nice thing to do. But yeah, creating as many favorites lists as possible. The thing is, a lot of us have those SD cards in the radio. The only time it really sucks up memory is when it's recording radio transmissions and storing them. As for the favorites list, they're little text files that don't take up hardly any space. So let's talk about doing GPS scanning with a clean slate scanner, like a 996 or a 325P2. So you're going to have to program the radio. You can import in from Radio Reference through the Butel software, as long as you're a paid subscriber to Radio Reference, that geotagging information. So you import it in. You'll do a checkbox within the programming somewhere to enable GPS scanning. So when this is connected up to a GPS kit, it will turn on that particular thing when you're in that area. So definitely keep that in mind. It's really handy on a 996 or even a 325P2. So you can even do it with that. It's probably a little easier with the clean slate scanners because you can just go into the database using the Sentinel software and pick and choose what you're looking to monitor. But it's really handy to be able to do GPS scanning. So, question about, he finally broke the piggy bank, Stuart, and bought and ordered the SDS 200. So GPS, for the GPS process. So yeah, you're going to need that kit if you didn't already purchase it, if you're using the radio mobily. So I can actually show you on the slide deck. We'll roll back and I'll kind of show you what devices you'll need. So roll back to that slide. Oops, one too many. So right here, so it basically takes the dongle, which is right here. I know it's probably hard to see my mouse, but right there. And then it also takes that phone cord. So on the rear of the SDS 200, there looks like a phone jack in the rear, so that's going to plug into there, and that's going to plug into that dongle. With the 200, it requires the fewest amount of parts compared to the other radios. And of course, the portables will need, the dongle, that junction box that's right to the left of the dongle. It'll need the phone cable. It'll need one of the cables with the serial with the appropriate connection. And then, of course, it'll need the power cable that you see there. So it's a whole mess of things. But yeah, it makes it work. And this kit was made so it'll work with more than one radio. That's why there's multiple plugs and such. But we've done a whole show on that. So if you're curious to see, how do I wire up a 996P2, you can watch that show here on the YouTube channel. So we'll cover a couple of things. So I actually was out at the Dayton Hamfest this year. I wasn't planning on going. I'm not a ham, so it's typically something that I don't typically go out there, but I was asked to go out there, to come by the Scanner Master booth, so I ended up going out there and visiting with the folks at Scanner Master. A lot of people asking through social media or any updates on their remote head. I did have a conversation with Rich Barnett, the owner of Scanner Master. He stated that they're in the process of working on it, so they're still working on it right now. They're beta testing. They want to make sure this is perfect before it goes out to market. And there's a lot that goes into this. With this remote head, it will work on multiple radios on the Uniden side of things. So there's a lot of key factors, going into that. There's also a lot of factors going into how it's designed. It also will have an onboard speaker as well, so it'll be able to bring up that audio in there. It's got a full color screen. It looks very much like the screen of an SDS 200. The look and feel of it. Joe P also asked a question in the chat. Whistler table. Yes, I stopped over there. I met with a couple of their people from Whistler. It's interesting that they're actually the new ownership of Whistler is located right here in Cincinnati. So pretty much, not too far away from me. Super nice guys at the booth. They knew who I was from the show, which was really cool. And they said they're working on stuff right now. They recently took over the company, so it'll be a little bit before we see something coming from them. But they plan on doing a lot with the scanner line. I mean, they assured me that there will be some things coming out at some point. So that'll give us a lot of stuff to talk about, hopefully. And I'm looking forward to it. I even asked about, possibly coming on the show. And when they have something that they want to announce, they were open to that as well. So really excited to kind of have some communication on the Whistler side. Of course, Bearcat Joe watches when he can on this show, so he's able to chime in as the expert on the Uniden side. It'll be really nice to be able to have the same from the Whistler side. And as I've always mentioned, it's great to have Whistler and Uniden competing with one another. It makes for healthy competition. Also helps with, trying to keep the prices, competitive as well. When I was working back in the day at Scanner Master, when it was GRE versus Uniden, of course, they had to be competitive when it came to the technology, but they also had to be competitive when it came to price as well, because, at the end of the day, certain things it's going to be features and the price. And that's where you kind of decide, okay, so I have X amount of dollars to spend, and I like the features of this radio, and I also like some of the features of this radio. And then it could come down to price at that point. If you like features on the Uniden model and you like features on, in this case, the Whistler model, it comes down to, okay, what's the price? Do I want to spend, the extra X amount of dollars for this one, or do I want to save a couple of bucks and get a couple of accessories other than the scanner in this purchase? And that's kind of a deciding factor. The other thing that I've heard from a lot of scanner enthusiasts, price is just, it's crazy how much the digital radios are. Unfortunately, in this day and age, the radios that we need for public safety are on the pricier end, with a lot of agencies using a digital communication. You're going to have to lean towards a digital radio. Back when shortly after when I got into this hobby, there was some digital radios, but where I was living in Massachusetts, there was no digital. I mean, I could buy a digital radio, but it wasn't necessary. So it all depends, on what your needs are. At this case, digital radios, and I'll be honest with you, are an investment. It's not cheap whatsoever. you're investing some money, and of course you're investing some time learning the unit as well. Commenter mentioned they were gifted a 436 paired with their 325P2. It's been great. I've also been running SDR, scanning over 7 departments as well as the fire departments, and it's been flawless. So scanning police and fire. Yeah, I mean, the 436, even though it's been around for a while, is a solid unit. I mean, I can't say enough about my 536 that I have in my truck. So you're probably wondering, why the 536 mobile? Why would you do that? Well, the good thing about it is, with me driving in the truck, the simulcast is not going to be as much of an issue. I'm a moving target. I keep rolling. So, of course, you may have some hiccuping here, but I'm going to move down the road and it's going to improve. So it's constantly, the environment's changing. I don't find mobily that I have an issue with simulcast. I've seen people having issues with simulcast when they're stationary, let's say in their home. If you're in between two or three towers with simulcast, they're both transmitting on the same frequencies at the same time, and that binary code is hitting your radio at the same time. So basically what's happening is your radio is like, whoa, what do I listen to? I got this one with a slight delay, and then I got this one with that I'm getting too. So it either hiccups or nothing at all. So a lot of times with that, an SDS 100 or 200 would address the simulcast issues. Or if you've got one of those unication pagers, that will address the simulcast issues. So that's, a big thing. But GPS scanning is a great feature, using that in the vehicle, especially if you're doing a road trip or you have a long commute. Chris Schultz checking in from JFK. And, of course, we have a check-in from East Tennessee, which is cool. So welcome, everybody. Hopefully everybody's having a good week. So Joe P. mentions when he's not dealing with simulcast, the 436 and the 536 are great. The 436 is his daily radio for right around town. Yeah, I mean, they're great, solid radios. I mean, the good thing with the 436, it takes 3 AA batteries versus just the 2. So it's got a better battery life. It's got a nice large screen. It's more of the traditional size portable radio versus the 325, where it's smaller and it only takes 2 AA batteries, and it can be a bit of a suck down batteries relatively quickly. Another person writes in the chat here that the 436 has been great through the main site. It doesn't have any they don't have any simulcast issues, which is great, which is really cool. That is good. Rhode Island checking in, John. He has his own SDS 100 and 200. Yeah, the 100 and 200 are great radios. I mean, they are constantly being improved upon, since they're a software-driven type of radio where you can rewrite some firmware and be able to improve upon, how it works. But certainly, yes, in Rhode Island, that's definitely a key thing for you. Being able to hear that Rhode Island trunk system. You have three sites over there. There's the south, the Metro Providence, and then the northern part of the state site. But good stuff there. Chris is reporting that he's watching planes at the TWA at JFK. So that's certainly really cool that you're able to do that. I know that you follow a lot of those live streams at the airports where they're broadcasting live, and you're able to see planes taking off and landing. And the cool thing about that is being able to hear that on the scanner as well, being able to hear communication, which is really neat. John's looking to get a disc cone antenna for his SDSs, which is great. Yeah, so as long as you're not dealing with any simulcast issues, go right ahead with the disc cone. Yeah, there's 3 sites there. I still remember a lot. Even though I don't do the scanner thing every day, I remember, looking up things for customers back in the day, and I still troll around on Radio Reference to see what's going on there. Any other questions or comments, certainly put those in the chat. I'm happy to answer any of those at the end of this. Of course, we're on the tail end of this broadcast. I just want to let you know about a cool event. Let me see if it's on the slideshow. Right here. I'm a part of the Cincinnati Railroad Club. So I've been doing a lot with them over the last year or so, a lot more with them. And that's why the show is reduced down to one Train Aficionado and Scanner Guys show, because I'm basically president of the Cincinnati Railroad Club. We actually do have a really cool event coming up on Saturday, June the 28th. We're going to be riding the rails from Cincinnati to Greensburg, Indiana. It's going to be a really cool trip. Passenger service hasn't ran on these tracks for many years. There's a photograph of the train. We're not going to be going over that bridge, but that's on one of the routes that they have for the Ohio Rail Experience. But we're going to be doing what they call the Big Four train trip. So it's going to be from Cincinnati to Greensburg, and then there'll be a 2-hour layover in Greensburg for you to be able to get some lunch. It's a cute little town. I went over there a couple weekends ago. There's several really nice restaurants and such. But you can purchase your tickets if you're from the Cincinnati area or in the neighboring states at CincinnatiRRClub.org. That's CincinnatiRRClub.org. Visit the website. Right on the homepage, you'll see this image. Click on that, and that'll bring you to the page to be able to order tickets for this great train trip. So definitely keep that in mind. We've got all types of cool stuff going on with the Cincinnati Railroad Club. I will actually be at a Railfan outing next month. So mark your calendars if you're from the Ohio area. I'll be in Hamilton, Ohio, which will be Saturday, June the 7th, from 8 a.m. until noon at Butler Street. It's a popular rail fanning spot in Hamilton. So we'll be watching some Norfolk Southern and some CSX trains. And then if Amtrak is running extremely late, we may catch that as well, but it hasn't been running daylight for the most part. Chris says he has a scanner with him at the hotel. That is awesome. I'm happy that you're able to travel to some of these really cool places to be able to watch the planes. I'm super happy that you're able to do all of this. So I also want to remind you, to make sure you follow, like, and subscribe to our social media as well. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram at The Scanner Guys. Check out the website, thescannerguys.show.com. That is the website. David, great question. Because unfortunately there's no stations that they're using with track side platforms. It is not going to be handicap accessible. You'll have to, there'll be a step, and then you'll have to step up into the coach. So unfortunately, it's on the there's a full write-up on the website for the Cincinnati Railroad Club when you buy your ticket. That is unfortunately a thing that stinks about about a lot of these places is where there's once train depots and stations, there's no more really. A lot of them got torn down when the passenger service went away. So unfortunately, you don't have the benefit of having a platform there or in this case, an elevated platform. Like if you're taking the commuter rail, you basically roll the wheelchair right on into the train. Unfortunately, it's not that handicap accessible, unfortunately. I'm sorry to say that. Amsterdam and the Netherlands watching tonight. Thank you so much, Josh, for checking in. I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. So welcome to anybody that's watching the show for the first time. We greatly appreciate that. We talked about tonight, GPS scanning. I know I didn't go into how to do it all with every scanner because every scanner is a little different. But I wanted to give you with this show how it all works, essentially. Basically, your scanner is receiving from a satellite, latitude, longitude, and then from there, it's determining, okay, from your programming, where you are. It's looking at that programming, seeing if anything matches latitude, longitude, and the radius, and turning things on and off in that particular area. So the things that you have to keep in mind with GPS scanning is you need to make sure that you have the GPS scanning enabled on that particular Uniden scanner. The other thing you want to make sure is that you have the baud rate correct. Make sure that the baud rate is correct. What I would recommend doing is if you're doing a road trip and you never used GPS scanning before, is to set up either some GPS scanning locally or a favorites list that's local, and take a little ride and make sure it's going to do what it needs to do when traveling. You want to make sure that it's going to turn things on and off as you travel. Because you know what? The last thing you want to do is go on the road trip and you're saying, why is this not changing? So do a little test before you actually do your big road trip. Make sure, create a little favorites list, for couple of towns. Maybe you're going to run down from Dayton, Ohio to Cincinnati. Make sure that Dayton turns off and then other things turn on and off on the ride down and then back up again. If that's working, then your settings are good. So then you just need to make sure that the favorites list that you're using are proper. We have another Rhode Island listener, an SDS 100. Do you typically have to pick up, security frequencies? Yeah, for the most part, malls have kind of gone away for the most part. Let's say you were at the Providence Place Mall. I'm not too sure if that's still, I believe it's still open and they probably have security in there. So typically with that, you have to be in a close proximity. Something like the Providence Place Mall may have a localized low-power repeater. So, to work, within the 3 floors. I believe that building is 3 floors. And then it also will work in the parking garage as well. So give them enough coverage. So typically, monitoring the security, it's going to work on their property and maybe slightly outside of it. Another example, since you're in Rhode Island, is the Plain Ridge Casino in Plainville. That trunk system that they're running there will work on the property and maybe slightly outside of it. It doesn't have a huge range outside of it. Like the Rhode Island Hospital, transportation and security. Transportation is probably going to have a great deal more distance if they're using, communication outside of the property. The security, it's all depending on what they've invested in there. Keep in mind, if they don't have a repeater there, it's all based on line of sight from you to, from one radio to another. So if you've got 2 radios that are 5 watts and their line of sight with one another, they're only going to have so much distance or so many FARs. Probably a couple of miles, give or take. Oh, boy, the Northeast is representing. Sarah's listening from Pembroke, Massachusetts. She has the 436 and 536, as I mentioned earlier. Really good scanners. But yeah, as for those security frequencies, it all depends on what they're using, and whether or not they have a repeater in play, or if they're on a statewide trunk system or whatever it may be. That's all going to dictate how far away you're able to hear it. Yeah, so East Providence PD and fire. Yeah, I believe when I was last there, they were still in the clear when I was living out there. I know Providence police. Most of all the secondary channels are all encrypted, and then the fire is in the clear, if I remember correctly. Seekonk police is all static, even 5 miles away. Didn't Seekonk switch over police? Are they still on? Are they digital over there or analog for PD? I can't remember. Let me take a quick peek. So we'll take a little adventure on radio reference here. So. And this will be kind of cool, and then we'll wrap up the show for the evening. I'll kind of show you how I would do this for customers. So I'll share my screen again. So back in the day when I worked at Scanner Master, somebody would tell me, I'm looking to monitor Seekonk police. So I would go to the radio reference database, and then I would go to Massachusetts, and then I would go, and of course I know that Seekonk is in Bristol County. So then I would go down and scroll down here. And of course, it's in alphabetical order. So then we would take a look at Seekonk and figure out what's going on here. So we've got, still going right here. So Seekonk Police does have a digital channel, and I'm not too sure if you've got this programmed in. It's their main channel here, which is 470.8125. And then it's digital here with a NAC code of 508. And you can tell that it's digital because it indicates it here. It says P25. So it looks like they're able to switch back and forth on this channel, either operating on analog or digital. So I would make sure that you're able to program this in twice. I would program it analog with the PL tone or digital PL tone of 351. And then program it again, same frequency as a digital with a NAC code of 508. Looks like they also have another channel here that's dual mode. I'm not too sure what's going on here. This is kind of interesting that they're running a VHF license here for something going on here. It looks like the details, so they're able to do analog and digital. And then, of course, Seekonk is fire is in the analog, and then it looks like the highway department as of right now is analog. But yeah, I would definitely take a look at that and see. I know Rehoboth, they were toying around with coming off the state police trunk system. They had this frequency here, this 460.0375. They're still, I believe, they're still on the Mass State Police trunk system. So there's some stuff there. Pembroke. So I haven't looked at Plymouth County in a while. So let's see what's going on there since we have somebody watching there. So Pembroke. Let's see. So it looks like P25. So your police are on P25. Your fire. Geez, I wonder how much they're using this low band channel. And then, of course, they've got 2 fire channels. And then they're running DMR for the DPW. So DMR is not as high-end as P25. The equipment is not as expensive. So the highway department chose to go with DMR versus P25. So that's really interesting. Let me just see what Middleborough's doing. That's where I grew up. Middleborough. So Middleborough looks like it's pretty much still analog for the police and fire. The DPW got a little fancy here with public works channels, which are DMR, and then it looks like looks like the schools are here, and then they've got the transportation channel, which they were using for the minibuses, and then of course the Middleborough Gas and Electric, which services both Middleborough and Lakeville, has a DMR trunk system. And then let me look at Lakeville. Yeah, Lakeville is still analog, so there's still a lot of communities that are still analog. A lot of police departments in Plymouth County have gone P25, but my old town, Middleborough and Lakeville, is still analog as of right now. And then I'll look at Attleboro, and then what we'll do is we'll wrap up this with any other questions. Okay, so let me look at Attleboro. Yeah, Attleboro is still analog. So what is the NAC code thing that I mentioned? Okay, so the NAC code, you know how you have a PL tone. So essentially, let me go to an easy one. We'll look at a Acushnet here. So a Acushnet DPW, and we're going to look at an analog thing first. So basically their frequency is 453.7875. So that would be the frequency you want to program into your scanner. And then you're able to put in this PL tone of 77.0. So let's say during the hot summer nights when signals start to drift, let's say there's some town well across the state that's using that same frequency. So if you don't have that PL tone on, you may pick up those radio transmissions. So if you put the PL tone on, the only thing that your scanner is going to listen for is that frequency in any radio that has that PL tone of 77.0. So the NAC code serves as the kind of the same thing. So basically you would program the frequency. We're looking at a Acushnet. So basically 482.8125. And then you would program in that NAC code. And excuse me. And then that NAC code is 997. So if there was another agency on that same frequency that was running digital, you're only going to pick up the radios that are using that NAC code. So it's kind of almost like a private line, essentially. So it's isolating any other agency that does not have the same PL tone or NAC code. So, it's only going to pick up that. Back in the day when I lived in Middleborough, Middleborough Police was on the same frequency as Burlington Police. Now, back in the day, they were on 482.4875, and then the Burlington Police were on the same frequency. So let me just see if that's still the case. A lot of things have changed. Nope, same frequency. So right here, the prime example. So let's take a look at this since we have a little bit of time. So the Burlington Police here are on 482.4875. So they have a NAC code of 272. So it's a P25 digital. So if we go back to, so mind you, this is Burlington in Middlesex County. So if we go back to Plymouth County and we scroll down to Lakeville, same frequency, 482.4875, but they're analog with 203.5 as their PL tone. So if I decided to program in this frequency and program it in to receive both analog and digital, which you can do on the scanner. So you could program it so the radio will not discriminate against an analog or digital signal. It'll pop in whatever. So let's say we do have a super high antenna and we live in Lakeville. And, so we pick up Lakeville Superb. And we have this frequency programmed in to be able to pick up either anything or analog or digital. So there's no PL tone, there's no NAC code that programmed into the radio. So let's say Burlington, really good night for reception. You could end up hearing Burlington PD popping in with a digital signal. Same thing if you were in Burlington and you had your radio programmed in just the way it is, not discriminating against analog or digital to receive whatever comes through without a PL tone or a NAC code, you could hear it. So this is a prime example. And I remember, when I lived in Middleborough and Lakeville were on the same frequency at that point. And I remember that I had the PL tone on, and I had a scanner that had signal bars. And I noticed that the signal bars were going up and down, but I wasn't hearing anything. So what I ended up doing is I turned off the PL tone, and sure enough, I was hearing another police department. And then this is before the internet. This is when I was a kid. So I didn't go to the internet. I had to go and look at my police calls book and figure out who else was licensed on the same frequency. So I learned that Burlington PD was licensed on there. Didn't happen all the time. It was the perfect reception for the weather. So basically what ended up happening is the weather was perfect for this situation to happen, for me to be able to hear Lakeville, or Middleborough in that case, when they were on the same frequency. And then Burlington was coming in at the same time. Reception things like that don't happen too often, but they do happen every now and then, especially with radio. They call what they call DXing, when you're trying to get distant signals on your radio. So you're able to hear some stations from a distance, which is really cool. The Sentinel software is a great way to program the radio, and you don't necessarily have to manually do it by the keypad. You could do it through the Sentinel software. So, for example, if you're doing this through the Sentinel software, it should be bringing in the NAC code. It should be bringing in the PL tone, because it's going to pull in, when you're selecting those things on a favorites list, it's going to pull in those particular channels. There are certain towns that sound horrible because of the narrow banding. And I remember, and I'm going to pick on Holliston, Massachusetts. When Scanner Master moved to Holliston, we were in Natick at one point. And when we moved into Holliston, I tried monitoring, I can't remember if it was the police or fire department, and their signal sounded like it was in the mud. It was bad. And I'm sitting at Holliston, and then we also had an antenna on the building that we were at, and we were still getting horrible reception. And it's just, certain systems, if they don't have their antenna high up or on a water tower or on a tall building, they may have limited capabilities. Yeah, so what I would recommend doing for the person that's asking about CConk, make sure that when you're creating a favorites list, include CConk Police. You probably want to include both channels. So if you're not selecting the whole grouping of the CConk frequencies, make sure you're grabbing both the digital and the analog. Marshfield, Mass. Yes, back in the day, Sarah, I remember Marshfield, Mass, having a trunk system, and they still have it to a degree, this Marshfield municipality trunk system, and the police department was on this system back in the day when it wasn't digital. Back in the day, it was actually It was actually analog, and it was kind of weird to monitor. But, and then Marshfield PD moved off of it. And then the fire department, I'm not too sure if they were on it as well. But back in the day, they used to have that trunk system. And I believe everybody was on it, but I can't remember now. So it's a little different today. But it looks like Marshfield PD is P25 digital. And then adding it manually through the software, you would have to do it through a favorites list. I'm running a Mac right here, so I'm not able to run Sentinel software. It doesn't support it. But basically what you're going to do is, if you've created a favorites list, you would basically right-click on the favorites list name, and then it would say program. It's going to say something, I can't remember the wording, but it's going to say programming. Program something. So if you click on that, it's going to open up a new dialog box, and then you're going to be able to go in there and program in stuff in there manually. I may have done a show on the Sentinel software on the YouTube channel, and I may have shown you how to do that. It'll be easier to watch that show than me trying to explain it verbally. But you're able to program things manually using the Sentinel software. Of course, I'm running a Mac, so unfortunately, I'm not able to show you. I don't have the Sentinel software on here, and I'm not running what we call parallels on this Mac to be able to run it as a Windows machine, so I can run that software. Unfortunately, the scanner hobby hasn't been so Mac friendly. So I have, and I've talked about this before, I have one of these laptops, inexpensive, low-end student laptops that's running Windows 10 on it. And basically I program all my two-way radio stuff, my GMRS two-way radio stuff, and I also program in, my scanners on that as well. Yeah, so you would have to create it into it's going to want to do a system name, and then it's going to want to do a department section as well. So if you're having to do that from scratch, you would have to create that hierarchy, and then once you're there, then you're going to program in frequency, and then you would put in an alpha tag, you would put in the PL tone. You also have to, and this is very important when you're manually doing programming through the Sentinel software or through the Butel software, if you're using that, you need to put a system, what is it? It's escaping me now. It was on the, system type. Whether it's law dispatch, public works, as you see on the screen here. Let me go full screen. So all these system types are actually listed here as a tag on radio reference. So basically law dispatch, fire attack, utilities, schools, public works. So these are all grouped together, and you can turn them off on these database scanners by system type. So if I wasn't interested at all in monitoring, the fire departments, I could turn off fire dispatch, fire talk, fire attack, and then I wouldn't hear anything for the fire departments. Then, of course, I could turn those on. But yeah, you need to, when you do that, make sure you mark that channel as law dispatch. All right, I've gone over time with the show. Is there any other questions before we wrap up for this evening? I know we kind of went through a little bit of, scanner programming there, but is there any other questions or comments before we wrap it up for this evening? All right. But yeah, definitely check out on the YouTube channel. There should be a video for using the Sentinel software. You're very welcome. I appreciate that. I'm here to try to answer as many questions as I can. I mean, this is a small niche community, and I want to make sure that I'm able to, try to help you guys out with any questions that you may have. Paul's asking, is it possible that some municipalities are using P25 having a weak signal, almost like the signal is designed to work within the boundaries of the city or towns? Any thoughts? So you got to think of this. So the public safety, when they built their systems, basically they have the city limits is what they're trying to make their system work. So let's say if we take the we'll take the town of Mansfield, for example. No, or Marshfield. We'll use Marshfield for an example, since Sarah's talking about that. Marshfield would basically set up their system so it would work within the town and then maybe slightly outside of that. So they don't have the scanner enthusiasts in mind when they're setting up the system. So as I explained to many people, it's pure gravy. Anything that you're able to get beyond the city or town limits on a scanner is pure gravy. So if you're able to hear, like for me, I was living in Attleboro, and I was still able to hear Middleborough Police and Middleborough Fire with an outdoor antenna, along with Lakeville Police and Lakeville Fire. So I was able to still hear my hometown. It wasn't as clear as being in my hometown, but I could still hear it. So with that, the signal is pretty much, when they design the system, the analog conventional, they put up a repeater, or the digital system, they're going to make sure it works within the town limits or the city limits, and maybe slightly outside of that. Anything more than that, is pure gravy. Unless they're on a regional trunk system or a state trunk system, that'll broaden that footprint a little bit more. So it's all based on, that footprint essentially. So the bigger, like if you're just a little city or town, it's going to work within that town, city or town limits. Anything beyond that's pure gravy for us. We benefit from that distance, getting it a lot further away. If they're on a regional system, trunk system, you're going to be able to hear it based on the site that you're monitoring. If they're a part of that tower that you're monitoring, then you're going to be able to hear it. So it's going to broaden that footprint a little bit bigger. Same thing with a state trunk system. Like, for example, what was it, Rehoboth? Rehoboth PD, because they're on the state trunk system and they're on the Plymouth-Bristol County Tower, that means that you can hear a Rehoboth PD. If you've got that talk group programmed in, you can hear it across both Bristol and Plymouth County. You can hear it on both towers. So, not both towers, both counties, I should say. So you're able to hear that town, and of course their radio. So if one of their police officers drives over to Plymouth, they're going to be able to use their radio because it's able to hit one of the state towers, because it's a part of that that system that's covering basically Plymouth County and Bristol County. Wow, that's crazy, Sarah, that you had to do that with tin foil. But that was pretty nifty that you were able to do that. So that's really cool that that you grew up in Mansfield and you're still a scanner enthusiast, which is really cool. But that's pretty much with the boundaries. It's all based on, the strength of their signal. All right. I guess we've wrapped up all the questions here tonight. If you need anything else, we'll be back next month. I'm going to try to keep the show to the 4th Wednesday of the month. If I do have time, I may produce some short videos. I'm trying to get to that so you guys can get a little bit more content outside of the live show. But next month, we'll be back on the 4th Wednesday, which should be Wednesday, June the 25th. So we'll be back again live on the channel. So make sure you set a reminder in your phone, mark your calendar. We'll be back live. And as always, if you missed the live show, you can watch it on the YouTube channel. I thank everyone for their questions and watching tonight. We hope that you have a great evening. Be safe out there and happy scanning. We'll talk to you again soon.